disdain, or even fear, as Mr. Smith. I recently got my Master's of Divinity from Logsdon Seminary, and so I would prefer it if you called me Divine Master. But for fear of causing those who are tempted to idolatry to stumble, I'm not asking to call me these names. I'd like to tell you a long story that started in Palestine about 2,000 years ago and actually goes back even further to the time of Abraham. It's the story of God getting involved in human history. God made the world, God made man, and man fell away from God, and God chose, rather than managing the rest of the cosmos and not caring about us at all, rather than simply destroying all of us, God chose to be involved in a way that affirmed the value and dignity of human persons, while simultaneously avoiding and condemning our sin. He affirmed our sinfulness while simultaneously saying no to it, that he would judge us. And in this process, God worked with the nation of Israel up until a time when the times were fulfilled, and it was appropriate for him to get involved in the muck and mire of human history in the person of Jesus Christ. And Jesus preached that the time is fulfilled and the kingdom has come. And in his life, his teachings, his death, his resurrection, Jesus Christ became the way for us to have access to God the Father. He said that I am the way, the truth, and the life. And after the resurrection, Jesus ascended into heaven after giving instructions to his closest confidants, his friends and associates, that you are to take my message around the world. The global mission of the church to take the gospel to all nations, which we see in the book of Revelation, is fulfilled when around the throne people from every tribe, tongue, nation, and we would say nationality, culture, people group, and subculture, worship God in the name of Jesus Christ. That's what we see in Scripture. And in the middle of that, we have people like Paul the Apostle going around and delivering this message, this gospel message, this good news message that in Jesus Christ, God not only loves us, but has conquered our evil. The evil mess we've made of the world, God is undoing. He has put death in reverse, coming out the other side. And men like Paul the Apostle preach this message, as he says in 2 Corinthians 10, in a way that does not use human weapons of warfare. The Christian does not conquer the world with swords or guns, bricks or baseball bats, but by tearing down every high and vain thing that opposes the knowledge of God. Every idea that is destructive to the knowledge of God, Paul says the Christian reaches up with the power of logic and rhetoric and the power of the gospel itself and tears it down so that people can see the truth. Ladies and gentlemen, children and adults in attendance, you are here today to watch our seniors try to apply the skills of logic and rhetoric to do this very thing. A task that started in such a small place and is now taking a long road all around the world of the gospel of Jesus being used to tear down the idolatries of the world so that people can see the one true God, turn to him, and worship him. The students today will tackle difficult issues, body modification and its relation to addiction and self-harm. Difficult issues to understand, like vaccinations and whether or not they're really safe. And if they are, it needs to be examined and proven much more carefully than it has been done. Or the issue of youth and their exposure to the sexualized picture of women in visual media. And is that appropriate? Is it wise? And is it helpful? And they will look at these from a gospel-centered perspective and try to deliver it to you logically, rhetorically, convincingly, so that you might change your mind about something that could change your life. And you'll see the parts of speech we've talked about before. The exordium, they will grab your attention. The narratio, they will tell you what you need to know to understand. They won't leave you in the dark. There will be no use of multisyllabic words that cost $50 to purchase. Or if they are, the student will pay for them themselves by explaining what they mean. There's a probatio, a defense of the previous statement called a propositio, the thesis. finally a refutatio, a destruction of everything that goes against it, and then a final emotional and moral appeal to tell you not only what you should think, but perhaps how you should feel and what you should do. It is without further ado, without further comment, that I invite Chase Harris to introduce Katie Deines.
Thank you, Divine Master Smith. Well, salutations, Annapolis. My name is Chase Harris, and it's my pleasure and honor to introduce Ms. Kate Deines. Kate has been attending Annapolis since 9th grade, and she has been accepted to over 5 colleges. She wishes to pursue a career in psychology with a focus in cognitive studies and developmental psychopathology. And without further delay, Ms. Kate Deines.
Imagine having your tongue split in half, needles piercing your skin for 700 hours, implants inserted under the skin above your eyebrows, your earlobes stretched a full inch, and your front teeth filed to points. Now, before we move on to my argument, I'd like the audience to do an experiment with me. If you have a tattoo, please stand. Now, imagine if 1/3 of the audience here, rather than this small number, you may sit down by the way, had tattoos or the extreme forms of modification that I just described. 1/3 of the people here, your peers, friends, families, teachers, students, imagine them having these modifications done. The man with the specific modifications I just described is Yarbrough, more commonly known as the Lizard Man. All of his modifications were done in order to transform his body into a reptilian resemblance. There are numerous people like him, most of whom go by their stage names. Cathryn, the Tiger Lady, the late Stalking Cat, the Enigma, the Mexican Vampire Woman, Zombie Boy, the list goes on. Each of these people strive for differing goals, from reclaiming their bodies, to expressing themselves uniquely, to standing out of the crowd. They consider themselves beautiful in their own right. Looking beautiful or unique through unconventional means seems to be a common goal in America today. An estimated 1/3 of the American populace between the ages of 18 to 39 is decorated. Examples of self-expression surround us in the form of body modification, which may be defined as the wounding of the body or bodily parts by cutting, piercing, or tattooing, as a cultural practice or expression of creativity or identity. As our culture grows accustomed to the idea of needing to be different, it continues to push the boundaries of what unique self-expression is. With the constant changes to what we consider unique, what was originally considered taboo or unacceptable becomes acceptable as it becomes mainstream. For the purposes of this argument, I'll make a distinction between mainstream and socially acceptable. Mainstream will be defined as a practice witnessed on a relatively common basis, while socially acceptable will be defined as a practice that no longer has a negative connotation associated with it and is in no way condemned. Body modification is becoming socially acceptable as it becomes mainstream through the addiction to expressing oneself uniquely. The change is dangerous in 3 ways. Addiction to body modification is physically, psychologically, and spiritually harming. According to many authorities on the subject, body modification and self-mutilation are the same. One of the first comprehensive books published on the idea of the relationship between the two was written by Dr. Armando Fabaza. He defined self-mutilation as the deliberate destruction or alteration of one's body tissue without conscious suicidal intent. Behavior moves from normal to addictive when it A, both produces pleasure and reduces negative moods, and B, includes 2 key features. 1, the individual is unable to control, cut back, or stop the behavior, and 2, the individual continues to use the behavior despite substantial negative consequences. With an understanding of these definitions, the matter of addictive pain and self-expression can be explored. However, a brief history of the specific types of body modifications to be mentioned will aid in the clarity of my points. Modern tattoos originate in the 16th to 18th century from maritime expeditions. There are 5 recognized types of tattoos, but for the purposes of the speech, only professional and amateur will be referenced. Amateur tattoos are ones put by people themselves or their friends. Professional tattoos are placed for either cultural ethnicity or modern art. A type of tattoo that recently came into being is the scleral tattoo. In the procedure, the whites of the eyes are colored by using a hypodermic needle that's inserted beyond the surface layer of the eye. Traditional tattoo ink is then injected. The injection method of tattooing the eye was introduced in 2007. Since then, Howie Boatman, one of the most skilled at the practice, has refined the technique and performed it many times. 2 men, David Bolts and Paul Eamon, tattooed their eyes on a reality television show. The practice has only sparked from there. People are signing petitions to legalize practice in the few places where tattooing the eye is considered illegal. They're also trying to pass bills stating that there's nothing wrong with the practice of tattooing the eyes. Piercings have been used to mark marital status, rank in society, and individualism, or being part of a certain group. The most common facial piercings are tongue, nostril, eyebrow, and lip. Piercings such as the septum, nose bridge, labret, and Monroe are creeping up in popularity. Surface piercings are piercings of the skin that are not particularly concave or convex. The piercing passes through a flap of skin rather than completely through a piece of body tissue from one side to the other. Modern piercings started their rise to popularity in 1975, but didn't escalate much until the 1990s. They have an 80% rejection rate, meaning that 80% of the piercings given will be rejected by the body. The bar or ring with which the body was pierced will be pushed through the skin and ejected. Microdermal anchors are piercings that consist of 3 parts, called the anchor, the post, and the gem. The anchors are implanted under the skin with only 1 entry point. Most anchors have tiny holes in the foot part for body tissue to grow around and become stable and more permanent. It makes removal a little more difficult. They only have a 2% rejection rate. Piercings such as the tongue, ear, nose, etc. all date back considerably. A woman in Genesis 24:47 is mentioned as having her nose pierced. It was part of a cultural practice at the time. Think for a moment. How weird is it to see a woman without an ear piercing? They only started growing in popularity in the 1960s, but are so mainstream and socially accepted that it's considered an oddity if a woman does not have a piercing of some sort. While ear piercings are socially accepted, corset piercings have not yet reached that status. There are a series of at least 4 piercings that are pierced side to side and then laced up with string or ribbon to take on the appearance of a corset being laced up the body. This practice was introduced in the late 1990s. Tongue bifurcating, or splitting, was also introduced in the 90s and was initially unthinkable to everyone. Now, only 20 years later, the practice is considered common among the body modification culture. Unless a person had a fully healed tongue piercing at the base of the length of the desired cut, people can expect to need more than 1 splitting. With the developed scar tissue from the piercing, the tongue will almost assuredly heal back to an almost perfect state. It's not uncommon for people to acquire 2, 3, or more tongue splits before they reach the desired length of the split. Implants exist in a few categories. What we think of now with little reserve are breast implants. When the procedure was first introduced in 1962, it was considered extremely taboo. They are now given as a way to help a sense of poor body image, or even as a reward for graduation students. In only 50 years, it has changed from unthinkable to socially acceptable. Other types of implants include transdermal and microdermal anchors, which are synonymous. Subdermal implants, unlike transdermal implants, lay entirely beneath the surface of the skin. Any desired shape or pattern can be produced by a modifying specialist. With this understanding of the history and descriptions of these terms, I would like to reiterate one of my points. Body modification is becoming socially acceptable as it becomes more mainstream due to the addiction of unique self-expression. Body modification is both a physically and psychologically addictive practice. As stated earlier, there's a considerable likeness between self-harm and self-expression or body modification. Both self-harm and body modification practices pierce the skin and thus release endorphins into the body system. This creates a natural high. The thoughts of pain and tattooing are normally associated with one another, but what about the thought of being tattooed or pierced because of the pain? hormones help the body to achieve a natural high, and people will frequently use the form of cutting to achieve such a state. Cutting is a form of self-mutilation in which the person committing the act attempts to break his or her own skin with various items. In the process of receiving a tattoo, one's skin is punctured repeatedly, simultaneously drawing blood, similar to an act of piercing, and being pierced, similar to an act of piercing. And since cutting is considered a form of self-mutilation and an addictive practice, it coincides with the idea of tattooing and piercing being an addictive form of self-mutilation. Both cutting and tattooing or piercing are ways of expressing oneself. Both can be displayed publicly or seen only privately. There are also many drives behind committing the act. The study, Speaking Through the Body, the Incidence of Self-Injury, Piercing and Tattooing Among College Students, gave the students 4 groups to choose from, with the addition of self-injury. The participants were encouraged to choose more than one reason. Of the 4 groups, the results indicated that 86% tattooed and 62% pierced for artistic expression. 2% of these self-injured by the process. 52% pierced, 15% tattooed, and 32% pierced to look attractive. 7% of these self-injured. 29% tattooed and 25% pierced for the rush. 11% of these self-injured. 21% tattooed and 24% pierced for a rebellious statement. 7% of these self-injured. The study also states that after a while it just feels like a routine and a way to keep your mind in check. While self-mutilation is not the predominant factor or purpose among these college students, it was still linked to tattoos and piercings. It was also found that in each of these 3 body-altering behaviors, there was an expressed sense of relief and significant decrease in the percentage of anxiety and tension reported after engaging in the act of body alteration. With this in mind, is it beyond reach to say that, in a way, we're addicted to self-expression? Since piercing and tattooing are both similar to self-harm, and people are capable of becoming addicted to self-harm, people therefore are capable of becoming addicted to piercing and tattooing. It is important at this time to note that, due to federal law, the tattoo artists or body modifiers are unable to give their customers any pain relief. Since the procedure is not technically considered medical procedures and are done in body art studios or tattoo parlors or the like, and not in hospitals or exam rooms, the patient, so to speak, must endorse purchases free of any anesthetics. Is there not an obvious addiction to being unique when people go to such lengths as making their backs literal corsets or splitting their tongues in half? What about buying a full body tattoo? Well, it may be explained by the fact that it can be an addictive practice to modify oneself for reasons stated previously. People are also inclined to make a statement. This is where the practice becomes spiritually harming. The narcissistic attitude of doing absolutely anything to appear unique is self-worship. Individuals with these extensive modifications not only admit but proudly proclaim that they're the only one that looks like themselves. Mr. Bolsh, one of the men with his eyes tattooed, stated that everybody's got stretch ears, everybody's got this and that, but you never see anybody that's got the whites of their eyes tattooed. People famous for their detailed and full body modifications include names like those listed previously. Most of them have, at some point or another, mentioned how glad they are that nobody looks like them. They mirror Mr. Bolsh's statement of exalting their uniqueness. Since people are constantly pushing the limits of what normal is, it would make sense that new shocking ways of expression are formed, wouldn't it? Tongue splitting and corset piercings, as well as the cosmetic eye tattoos, are both ways of pushing those limits. As something becomes popular or mainstream, it eventually leads into social acceptance of that thing. Corset piercings and eyeball tattoos may seem abnormal now, but how long will that last? Think about the increase in mainstream popularity of plastic surgery just from the 1960s. As Mr. Harrison Ross defined the slippery slope, the unthinkable becomes horrible. Horrible becomes controversial. Controversial becomes not acceptable. Not acceptable becomes not normal. Not normal becomes normal. I would like to add that normal then becomes common to the point that it is socially accepted. In the 1960s, breast implants were unthinkable. As people had time to adjust to the idea and saw others with the implants, they began to get over the controversy. They accepted the idea and even the practice as it started to surround them. Now, it's not only an accepted thought, but it is an accepted practice. From 1992 to to 2012, there was an 11,400% increase in the amount of procedures done. Dr. Yarbrough noted that there was a specific increased demand for the procedure during the graduation season. With this, we can see that this once non-accepted modification has become socially accepted through being mainstream since it was introduced. Now, some of you may be thinking that Christians shouldn't partake in body modification based on a biblical understanding. Well, I defined body modification earlier as the wounding of the body or body parts by cutting, piercing, tattooing as a cultural practice or expression of creativity or identity. Because that is the accepted definition within clinical studies of the practice. However, body modification may also include anything done to the body after the point of birth. Broader definitions include the use of many different normal practices or items, such as wearing clothes or makeup, exercising, cutting or coloring one's hair, shaving, the list goes on. You may be thinking, that's great, but what about scripture that explicitly says no tattoos? One of the most commonly referred to verses on this topic is Leviticus 19:28, which states, "You shall not make any cuts to your body, the dead, or tattoo yourselves." This verse was directed toward the Israelites, who were surrounded by people partaking in gruesome acts to worship idols. It was not a general, overarching, hard and fast rule for every person in every instance. Cultural surroundings around all of the verses denying the allowance of body modification do not necessarily apply to today. The verse immediately preceding it, Leviticus 19:27, says that men should not shave or cut their hair. If 19:28 still applies, does that still apply too? I'm pretty sure that everyone here has at some point shaved their faces or cut their hair. 1 Corinthians 6:19-20. Or do you not know that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit within you, whom you have from God? You are not your own, for you were bought with a price, so glorify God in your body. Well, what does glorify God in your body mean? Is it automatically dishonoring him if one obtains a tattoo, piercing, implant? Cosmetic reconstructive surgeries are still considered body modification, so should people who have mastectomies not have breast implants? People who have gun wounds to the face not have repairs made? Obviously, if you are worshiping yourself, idols, or Satan with your modifications, there's a problem. But you're not automatically committing a sin because you have a tattoo or piercing. If this were the case, what would that say about the people that stood earlier? Would they be dishonoring God with their tattoos? This being said, body modification is not bad on an individual basis of self-expression. The harm comes in when the culture as a whole is entirely obsessed with being unique to the point that they alter their bodies beyond what is seemingly possible. If man no longer has the ability to function as a fit human being, then he has taken his body modification too far. Fitness, as described by PhD physiologist Lon Kilgore, is having enough strength, endurance, and mobility to participate successfully in work, recreation, and familial obligations. If your modifications do not allow for fitness as described, then you have crossed over from self-expression to self-mutilation due to an obscene addiction. Now that that's out of the way, what about all the money people spend on these things? People have estimated the lizard man's tattooing alone at costing $250,000. Shouldn't people be spending their money on things to further the kingdom of God rather than decorate themselves? As Christians, we already set aside money for tithes and offerings. We also set aside money for self-pleasure. I agree that we should strive to further the kingdom, but how is decorating yourself different from buying a new car, from going on a shopping spree, from buying a second, third car, or a larger home? Tattoos, piercings, and implants can actually be a more permanent and less expensive alternative to currently and long-time accepted forms of self-help. Tattoos can be expensive. Generally, a good artist costs between $150 to $200 an hour, but it is considerably less expensive than buying a new sports car. Taking all of these factors into consideration, our psychological and physical addiction to being unique is becoming socially acceptable in its frequency. One body modification enthusiast stated that they looked forward to the coming years when the industry could flourish, since the generation that hates it would be dead and no longer able to oppose it. If you ask almost any person of my generation, they will see little to nothing wrong with the practice. Thinking practices are taboo to thinking these practices might not be so bad. The path will eventually move to include thoughts from the majority of people saying there's nothing wrong with the extreme forms of body modifications. With that type of mindset, we can quickly become a society full of lizard men. We can look at talons on our hands and whiskers implanted into our faces with awe, reverence, and even jealousy. What I challenge you with is not to remove body modification from our culture, but instead to draw a line between self-expression and self-mutilation. While Scripture does not condemn tattoos or piercings, it does say that we are made in His image in Genesis 1:27. It's not hard to imagine that He would not allow Himself to practice modification on His body to the point that He became either addicted to the release it offers or addicted to looking unique. We are created a certain way and should not try to look like the animals He created as different from us. Our tongues do not need to be forked, nor our backs a walking corset. Individuality is not the problem. Changing our mindset from that of God's child is.
Mike, check. Kate, great job.
Thank you.
Enjoyed that presentation. Very interesting pictures. I'm curious. The thing is about to feedback. I'm just nervous about it. Whoever's back there. Okay, thank you. I'm curious. You say in your conclusion that we shouldn't remove body modification from our culture, but we should instead draw a line between self-expression and self-mutilation. I guess my question is, that's fine in theory to say that. Where is the line that we should draw? When does it become when is too much, one tattoo might be self-expression. 10 tattoos might be self-mutilation. I don't know, or 20 tattoos, so where is that line? And I'm just curious where you would draw that line, because I don't, or is there an objective sort of line that should or could be drawn? And if so, could you point us in that direction?
Well, I described fitness by physiologist Lon Kilgore as being able to function with mobility and capability in work, recreational pursuits, and familial obligations. When you can no longer do those things, I would say that you have crossed over that line. If you are putting your body modifications financially above your other obligations and you're no longer able to take care of your needs, then I think that it has definitely gone too far.
Do you think it is wise for people in this room when they turn 18, would you think that it is wise or unwise for them to get tattooed?
I think that is based on their parents' decisions and their parents' wishes for them to have them or to not have them. We are called to honor our mother and our father in our decisions, and I think that dependent on their family and their upbringing, that it is up to that to make the decision for them.
I'm thinking specifically about the people with sleeves on their arms or visible areas of their body. I'm thinking about those people going into, society and not working in a circus sideshow, right? Like obviously some of those people that you put up there are extremes.
Yes.
They might be able to actually make a very good living off of that sort of modification, as a freak show of some sort, right? That's clearly what they're going
Yes.
for, right? But I'm just thinking about if you don't take it to that extent, do you think it's wise for people to get tattooed knowing that these are future, doctors? I mean, would you go to a doctor? I don't know. How would you feel about going to a doctor who had tattoos down his neck and arm and, I don't know.
Well, personally, I don't have a problem with it. I don't have a problem with seeing tattoos on people, but some people do, and that does affect their ability to work functionally in society. And according, again, to the definition of fitness, if they cannot do that, then they should not do that. should not obtain a modification.
Right, so I guess my question is, do you think tattoos limit people's ability to function in society?
Currently, yes, but I think that it will eventually, society will change to the point that it's socially acceptable and that there will be no problem in hiring someone with these modifications.
Okay, thank you.
So if something is socially acceptable, what's the relationship between being socially acceptable and the spectrum between expression versus mutilation? Is there any correlation there?
I'm sorry, can you rephrase the question?
So one could imagine a point when, let's say that tattooing your eyes becomes a very cheap procedure, so money isn't a factor. It could become socially acceptable, I suppose, if enough people did it. Even if it becomes socially acceptable to walk around with glowing red eyes, does that have any bearing on whether it's where it is on the spectrum from self-expression to self-mutilation?
Yeah, there's a difference between socially accepted and self-mutilation. Just because something is accepted socially does not mean that it's safe to do in your body. In the procedure of getting your eyes tattooed, the needle is just inserted beyond the surface layer of the eye. But if yourself or the tattoo artist sneezes or moves a fraction of an inch, you could be dead if that needle's close enough to your eye. And I think that taking that risk just to have a colored eye is pretty stupid.
So your research also led you to, you quoted the numbers of the study that revealed that certain percentages of different people had experienced self-harm through their intended self-expression.
Mm-hmm.
Does that mean that we should not have tattoos either, because in fact there is the risk of self-harm?
Well, I think that's an individual basis, because I think that some people are more inclined to turn to addictive behaviors than others. Some people are more pain tolerant also than others, and they like the feeling because they are more tolerant. And some people don't like the feeling so much. They shy away from it after they have their initial tattoo, or they cannot finish their initial tattoo because of it.
Can it ever be healthy to enjoy pain?
That's a good question. I'm really not sure what I think about that.
Mr. Hansen was asking you about whether or not our students, when they turn 18, should be encouraged or warned away from getting a tattoo themselves. And your response was to suggest that it was a family matter. When does that change? Is it a family matter for a 30-year-old to choose or not to choose to get a tattoo?
Well, we are always supposed to honor our parents' decisions. We're supposed to honor what they think and what they want for us in our lives. That I don't think that there's a certain age point at which that changes. You're supposed to do that throughout your life, just like you're supposed to honor God's wishes throughout your life.
Thank you.
Why do you think it is that cutting is not socially acceptable, that tattooing and piercing are? Cutting is clearly seen as self-mutilation, but tattooing and piercing are seen as socially acceptable.
Well, it's actually very interesting you ask that, because there's this practice called scarification and another practice called branding, in which the artist specifically cuts a design into your skin. And the scar that heals afterwards is the pattern or the tattoo that you would get from that result. And that is becoming more popular as well. I think that bridge between the two is quickly being gapped. I think that cutting, especially the audience here would know Demi Lovato was put into rehab for cutting. She made that more public, and it made it more, I think, more common for people to partake in the practice. And there was, I think it was Justin Bieber, he tried weed, and so his fans posted a lot of pictures of him cutting themselves in protest of that. It's a very commonly thought of thing. I think that it's quickly becoming more and more acceptable.
in your conclusion, you noted that we are made in the image of God,
Yes.
and we should strive to demonstrate that. What if a Christian were to say that because of his freedom in Christ, he has the right to decorate himself to the full extent that he desires, and his decoration is perhaps with Christian symbols or Bible verses or something that draws attention to his identity in Christ? How would you respond to that?
Well, I think that the tattoos or piercings, etc., I don't think that they establish identity in Christ, because I think that is something that you find within yourself and through reading Scripture and studying His Word. But one of my favorite quotes in doing all this research is that my body is my temple, but my tattoos are my stained glass. I think that it's not dishonoring Him, automatically dishonoring Him, to obtain any of these things. I think that when you get it too far, that it's definitely dishonoring to Him, but I don't think that you can really find your identity per se in it.
We come back to that concept of too far, right?
Yeah.
So it's generally acceptable in our society that there are addictive behaviors, alcoholism, or gambling, that there is some type of genetic predisposition. I think you noted your thoughts that some people can be more predisposed to addictive behavior in general. So how does a young person know whether he would be predisposed to that, and how should he make decisions if he chooses to get one tattoo and his family is okay with that and then desires another? At what point would he be able, or would he be able to recognize whether he was one of those individuals who had a predisposition to addiction?
Well, it definitely takes some self-reflection and some time to think about who you are and how you have been raised and what has been going on around you in the development of yourself. And I think that if you note tendencies to addictive things, like if you tend to lean towards comfort food when you're distressed, I think that that's one indication possibly, if you kind of gravitate towards that frequently, or if you are raised in an alcoholic family. I think that just seeing that behavior in other people can sometimes trigger the realization that you can possibly have this happen to you. I think that there's a lot of things that you can think about, but it does require self-reflection, like I said. It does require some time for thought, and you shouldn't just go out one night and say, hey, oh, this tattoo's kind of cute, I should get that.
Some of the statistics that you mentioned noticed in 11,400% increase in cosmetic plastic surgery that was being done. Do you believe there's a correlation between the acceptability of plastic surgery in our society and the growing social acceptability of tattoos and brandings and piercings and other body modifications?
I do.
Just a couple kind of random follow-up questions here. I'm thinking of people like Michael Jackson and others. Do you think, would you label that an addictive, or would you be concerned about the extent to which he, as an individual, sought to modify his features? And you think that would be like crossing the line?
I do.
Okay. I'm just curious. You said that tattooing is becoming more and more socially acceptable, and I commend you. I think you kind of presented a very mature perspective on the whole issue. Would you ever consider getting a tattoo?
I would. It is something that has interested me since I was very young, and I've grown up with the idea, and I don't think that I would turn into one of the people that I had in my PowerPoint. I think that would be a bit much for me, but I would consider it, yes.
I may have some more questions, but while I'm generating them, I'll turn it over to the audience.
Time for a couple of audience questions.
about more of the cutting issue. Did you come across any studies that correlated people that wanted to get someone else to do their cutting, as you were talking about that crisscrossing type of stuff, with mental problems, with mental illness?
The artists are generally supposed to talk to the patient, as I called it, to see whether or not they are fit for getting the modification done. They're supposed to see if they seem like an addicted person, just like doctors are supposed to be able to know in the patient if they're drug seeking. The modifiers are supposed to be able to see with the person if they are physically capable of receiving these procedures.
And what training do those modifiers have to assess these people?
Currently, they don't have very much training. I think that's something that should change, but that isn't something that I really researched very much.
Hello. I was just wondering what parents
My parents have altering views on it. My mom is typically against tattoos and modifications. My dad is a little bit more for it, but not quite the extremes that I described.
Hi. My question is addiction. You're using that term quite a bit in your speeches. Are you saying being addicted to something is wrong?
Yes, I am.
And on what grounds is addiction wrong?
Well, when you're addicted to something, you are, as I defined addiction earlier, you're unable to control your behavior or cut back or stop something that has substantial negative consequences. And when that happens, how can that be beneficial for yourself?
But how do you know that's wrong?
How do I know that's wrong?
Well, yeah, the definition you just gave. Why is that wrong?
I'm sorry, can you say that again?
Why is it wrong to harm yourself?
Well, why would you want to harm yourself? Why should that be a good thing?
I'm asking the question to you.
I am too. I don't think that any mentally fit person would see something good in harming yourself or being addicted to something. There's no benefit to be gained from it.
But if someone could find a benefit, it would be right?
Well, potentially, I suppose, but there is no benefit from it.
My other question, you mentioned in Leviticus that I think it was Leviticus 28, about 1928, and you said that that's not culturally normative today for Christians. Is that correct?
Yes.
The next verse after that says, "Do not defile your daughters by making her a prostitute, for the land will be filled with prostitutes and wickedness." Is that also just culturally relevant for that time, or is it normative?
Well, that's
today?
still culturally relevant for today, because we still have prostitutes around us.
Okay, so so my question is, on what basis do you differentiate between what is culturally normative for today and not in Leviticus?
Well, I went on in my speech to talk about if you are worshiping yourself, idols, or Satan with your modifications, then there's a problem. But if you are not intentionally doing those things, then there's not a problem. Because the Israelites of that time, were worshiping idols with their tattoos and with their cutting.
Okay, thank you.
Well done, Katie.
Thank you.
Mr. Taylor, did you have your question or so? Because I think your time is up. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Cathryn. I'm a junior here at Annapolis, and this is my first year. I have the pleasure of introducing Abby Henderson. Abby has been here since 6th grade, and her interests include basketball, which she has played since freshman year, art, and pageants, in which she was one of the sale queens at this year's San Antonio Stock Show Road. Abby will be attending Abilene Christian University and studying pre-vet animal sciences in aspiration of one day becoming a veterinarian. She has received the Deines Award in Environmental Science Scholarships at ACU. Abby will be talking to you today about vaccinations, and without further ado, here's Miss Abby Henderson.
I do not like thee, Dr. Fell. The reason why, I cannot tell. But this I know, and know full well, I do not like thee, Dr. Fell. This nursery rhyme just about sums up the feelings of a child when it comes to the doctor. Children typically do not look forward to a doctor's office visit because they associate them with shots, which are a part of such a visit, usually. In truth, when any of us thinks of getting a shot or a vaccination, our thoughts probably go straight to that horrible and uncomfortable process of having that sharp needle pierce our skin. However, what the majority of people do not know is that the needle is the least of their worries. What if what is actually being injected into you could potentially do more harm than that needle could ever do? Let's begin by looking at what vaccinations are and how they became to be such an important part of public health today. In 18th century England, Edward Jenner noticed that dairymaids who had contracted cowpox, a disease similar to smallpox but much less severe, seemed to be immune to smallpox as well. In 1796, he successfully experimented with his theory by scratching the arm of a young boy with a material from a cowpox source and repeating the process again sometime later with added smallpox material. The boy proved to be immune to smallpox as a result of having contracted cowpox first. Then, in 1825, Louis Pasteur successfully used a live vaccine in a similar way to prevent a boy who had been bitten by a rabid dog from contracting rabies. Since these early and exciting experiments in disease prevention, immunizations have assumed a major place of prominence in the medical practice. Immunization is defined as both receiving a vaccine and becoming immune to a disease as a result of being vaccinated. And today, this almost always presupposes getting a shot. There are several types of vaccines, and each uses a different method to create immunity. One type of vaccine is the live attenuated vaccine. This is a vaccine which, like Dr. Jenner's cowpox scratchings and Pasteur's rabies vaccinations, contains a live, although weakened version of the virus microbe. Such vaccines provoke a strong response from the body's immune system. However, the most common type of vaccine used today is the inactivated vaccine. This type of vaccine contains a virus microbe which has been killed by heat, chemicals, or radiation. These are the most common because they are so easy to store and transport, since they do not require refrigeration and can, unlike live vaccines, can be freeze-dried. These types of vaccinations are known to only produce short-lived immunity, however, because they simply elicit a weaker response from our body's immune system. This requires that the patient receive multiple doses of the vaccine, also known as booster shots. The number of vaccines available has been steadily increasing since the polio vaccine was introduced in 1955. In the late 1950s, children received 2 vaccinations, one for smallpox and one for polio. Tetanus was also given, but only required by likelihood of exposure. Now, for those of you who can, please pay attention to the following information very closely. And as for the mathematically impaired, please take note of the chart. Less than 30 years later, in 1983, the U.S. Center for Disease Control, known as the CDC, was recommending 11 doses of 4 vaccines by the child's first birthday, including 3 more vaccines including 11 additional doses and 3 more vaccines by age 6, with a total of 23 doses of 8 vaccines to be given by age 18. Compare that to the current recommendation of 26 doses of 9 vaccines to be given by the first birthday, 48 of 14 vaccines by age 6, with a total of 70 doses of 16 vaccines recommended by age 18. The number of vaccines has thus doubled in the last 30 years, while the number of doses has tripled. Many of these vaccines contain harmful ingredients, live bacteria, or other potentially harmful things that could put a child at risk of side effects much more serious than the disease that the vaccine attempts to prevent. With new vaccines against increasing numbers of diseases added every year to the already extensive list, children are exposed to more and more chemicals which may have not been adequately tested in the many combinations possible within the chemistry of various individuals' physical makeup. My intention is to convince you that while much good has undoubtedly been done by certain vaccination programs in the past, the time has come to reevaluate the vaccine industry and carefully examine the way in which vaccines are manufactured, mandated, and marketed, as well as their potential for harm. The use of vaccinations began as a courageous effort to impede the widespread of what was at the time devastating diseases. However, they are now recommended by the CDC for illnesses that in recent decades were considered common and not particularly serious. Parents accepted chickenpox, measles, mumps, and the like as a natural part of childhood, though inconvenient for a few days, which would provide lifelong immunities against future encounters with the diseases in question. However, with the growth of the pharmaceutical industry, vaccinations have become a major industry, now generating over $20 billion in annual sales per manufacturer. As in any big business, the promise of bottom line yield may have influenced the manner in which the product, in this case vaccinations, are produced and marketed. The rapid development of new vaccines and the increasingly commercial style of advertising them may have begun to supersede safety considerations and the unbiased assessment of real need. This in turn raises the legal question of oblique intent. Oblique intent is when a certain natural result of a given course of action is known to be almost certain, but though it may not be the intended outcome, and the course of action is undertaken regardless of the possibility of the intended result occurring. A direct result of the industrialization of vaccinations is that the ingredients are added which make the medications much easier to mass produce and store, but which are known to be harmful in any other instance, especially to infants and children with weaker immune systems. Out of the 50 FDA-approved and licensed vaccinations, 24 contain formaldehyde. 14 of these are the most frequently used vaccinations today, including hepatitis B, MMR, N1H1 flu, and several others. Formaldehyde, which is formed by oxidizing methanol, is used as a preservative in various products to provide them with a longer shelf life, allowing companies to mass produce them. It serves this purpose in vaccines also, even though it is a toxic substance most commonly found in household cleaning products. The NCI, National Cancer Institute, states that formaldehyde has been classified as a known human carcinogen, which is a cancer-causing substance, by the International Agency for Research on Cancer, and as a probable human carcinogen by the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. It also notes that research studies have suggested an association between formaldehyde exposure and several cancers, including nasopharyngeal cancer, which is a cancer of the nasal cavity and passage, and leukemia. Not only is formaldehyde an obviously questionable ingredient, but there is strong evidence that aluminum, which is found in nearly all vaccinations, contributes to adverse reactions, including brain damage. Dr. Christopher Shaw, a neuroscientist and a leading researcher on the neurological effects of aluminum on humans, and Lujisa Tomjanovic, a PhD in biochemistry and currently the senior postdoctoral fellow at the University of British Columbia School of Medicine, together did a study on the potentially damaging effects of aluminum used in vaccinations. They discovered that aluminum, which is a highly neurotoxic metal, in the amount used in vaccines of 850 micrograms per dose, resulted in the almost immediate behavioral disorder and eventual loss of motor functions in neonatal mice caused by neuron death. Their studies also showed that those countries whose vaccinating schedules recommended the highest number of vaccines containing aluminum also had the most adverse effects, particularly various types of brain damage. Dr. Shaw explains that what most assume about aluminum in vaccines is that it is no different than the small amount of aluminum taken in orally, which seems to cause no real harm. However, the reason that oral aluminum causes no real harm is because it passes through the body so quickly, whereas aluminum in vaccines is acting as an adjuvant and is therefore meant to be retained in the body, prolonging the coverage time of the vaccine. Thus, it can slowly cause severe neurological damage to the brain's neurons. In addition to formaldehyde and aluminum, in spite of the widespread knowledge of its harmful effects, mercury and its compound thimerosal also continue to be used in manufacturing vaccinations. Though the reduction of mercury content was encouraged in 1999 and 2000 by joint statements issued by the FDA, CDC, and the American Academy of Pediatrics, there is still significance of this heavy metal found in the DTaP and DT vaccines, most flu vaccines, the meningitis vaccine, as well as trace amounts and several others. This occurs even though mercury is a neurotoxin known to be associated with severe cognitive dysfunction if accumulated in the body. Nor are the effects of other ingredients adequately tested before they are released for use on the general public. When pharmaceutical companies, which conduct their own safety testing on their products, apply for FDA license of a vaccination, after clinical trial, the manufacturer certifies that the product is safe. After this, product is licensed for distribution, and the fourth phase of clinical trial begins. The fourth phase of clinical trial, defined by the National Institute of Health, is data collected after licensure during the years of massive administration on the public. There are two reasons data is still needed at this point. The subjects of the manufacturer's clinical trials are handpicked by the companies themselves, meaning that their health and favorable medical history is well known, while the general public receiving the vaccination after it has been approved is a true random sampling. Vaccines will affect different people differently, and depending on the health of the individual's immune system and other factors. More importantly, clinical trials are relatively brief, especially those of vaccinations, and typically last only a few months. Yet, according to immunologist Dr. Yoda Schoenfeld, affiliated with the Tel Aviv University, the adjuvants and vaccines can produce autoantibodies as late as 6 months after the fact of vaccination, and the resultant autoimmune disease can display itself as late as 8 years later. An adjuvant is a pharmacological or immunological agent that modifies the effects of other agents such as a drug or vaccine. A Center for Autoimmune Disease Studies states that vaccine adjuvants were found to inflict, by themselves, an illness of autoimmune nature, defined as the adjuvant disease. Clearly, shortened studies are inadvisable if these types of findings are going to be considered important. Another concern that has been raised about vaccine manufacturers is in regard to the trustworthiness in testing their own products. The leading pharmaceutical manufacturing company is Merck. In 1999, Merck released a drug known as Vioxx. Not only did Merck begin marketing Vioxx before the drug had even been considered by the FDA for licensure, but knowingly falsified information and fabricated facts about their product. Eventually, in 2004, the drug had to be pulled off the market because over 60,000 people had died as a direct result of taking this drug. During the lawsuit against Merck concerning the Vioxx drug, they pleaded guilty to criminal charges on several different levels. Merck's now dealing with the lawsuit related to the effectiveness of the MMR, measles, mumps, and rubella vaccine. Two of Merck's former virologists accused Merck of overstating the efficacy of the MMR vaccination by a very large margin. Merck now openly admits that it knowingly falsified the test results of the MMR vaccine and overstated its efficacy. This strongly calls into question the reliability of Merck, which is the largest producer of vaccinations, as mentioned before. Regardless of the fact that manufacturers may be accused of various illegalities, such as falsification of data, according to Supreme Court ruling in 1988, known as the National Children Vaccine Injury Act, no vaccine manufacturer shall be liable in a civil action for damages arising from vaccine-related injury or death associated with the administration of a vaccine after October 1st, 1988. If the injury or death resulted from side effects which were unavoidable even though the vaccine was properly prepared and was accompanied by proper directions and warnings. In other words, they cannot be sued and are thus not held responsible for the damage caused by vaccines which seem to no longer be tested properly. Another concern regarding the safety of testing relates to the practice known as fast tracking. In these instances, drug companies are allowed to petition for FDA license, for FDA permission to market the vaccinations for months before the safety testing has been completed. This was the case with the new vaccine for HPV known as Gardasil, a recent addition to the list of vaccines recommended for girls ages 11 and up. Gardasil protects against the human papillomavirus, which is thought to be a possible cause of cervical cancer. After this vaccine was developed and tested for a short span of 9 months, it was presented to the FDA for fast tracking, and 6 months later was passed and put on the shelf. As soon as it was in circulation, Merck stopped all testing for this new drug rather than complete the projected 4 years testing cycle. Among the conditions required for a drug to be eligible for fast tracking is that there is no other drug like it on the market and it is in high demand due to a recent epidemic or serious need. There has not and is not a serious need for protection against HPV. Diane Harper, who has a Master of Public Health and as well as a Doctor of Medicine and the leading researcher in the HPV-related diseases, strongly questions the need for the Gardasil vaccination. Regardless of her contributions to the studies concerning the safety and efficacy, she still remains firm in her beliefs about taking this vaccine with extreme caution, reminding the public that less than 1% of cancer deaths in the United States are caused by cervical cancer, and the easiest way to avoid it is by having a yearly vaccine. It is also necessary to address some of the other vaccinations which have become huge profit makers for drug companies. One of the vaccinations given to newborn infants not even an hour after they are born is the hepatitis B vaccination. Hepatitis B is a virus which causes liver disease. Of course, this would be a very serious threat to any infant who might contract it. However, consider these additional facts. Hepatitis B is generally transmitted through the use of dirty needles, as may occur among drug users, the exchange of body fluids, as in sexual contact with an infected person, or, in addition, the vaccine is considered only to be effective for 5 to 10 years, which would mean that the child would be protected only until the ages of 5 to 10. Given this information, would universally mandated vaccination of newborn infants seem necessary unless, of course, the parents were known drug abusers, sexually promiscuous, or simply already infected with the disease? Obviously not, especially when the vaccine contains formaldehyde and aluminum, ingredients which have previously been identified as harmful to even a healthy adult, let alone a tiny child with a nervous system not even fully developed. Why then has hepatitis B been mandated for all newborns? Who stands to profit from such wide distribution? Manufacturers, perhaps? Yes, and also the people groups who truly need the vaccination because of their chosen lifestyles, and who are now able to conveniently purchase it at a price greatly reduced by its universal demand. Almost a part of our culture, and to oppose them in any way seems almost unpatriotic. This eradication of polio in the United States is almost always cited as a clear indication of the effectiveness of vaccinations. However, consider the following. At the same time the United States was struggling through the polio epidemic of the 20th century, the United Kingdom was dealing with the same crisis. Polio spread rapidly and was incredibly severe, leaving many who contracted the disease with some type of lifelong paralysis. The U.S. responded by implementing mandatory polio vaccination for all school-aged children, and the day seemed saved, right? Coincidentally, what most fail to notice is that the polio was in already sharp decline at the time the vaccine was implemented. It is also a little-known fact that polio died off in Britain at almost the same time without the implementation of any mandatory vaccination. Thus, while the vaccine is widely credited with the eradication of polio, it appears that other factors may be involved. In conclusion, please consider the facts that have been presented and the observations that have been made. Are all vaccinations, therefore, to be rejected out of hand? Of course not. That is not the question. The question is whether or not the vaccination industry is going about its business, as Harrison Ross says, in a manner that prioritizes the safety of the consumer. The decision of whether or not to vaccinate a child against what diseases and at what time in the child's life is not a decision that should be made by government agencies, or worse yet, by the drug companies that stand to benefit financially from the vaccination sold. Rather, they should be made thoughtfully and carefully by well-informed parents with the help of wise medical advisors who are well-informed themselves about the risks and benefits of vaccinations, which many doctors are not today. Caregivers should weigh the risks of vaccinations carefully, considering whether each vaccine is safe and necessary for each child as an individual. Life is a gift from God. Surely we must want to protect it in every way we can, whether by vaccination or by omitting or postponing certain vaccinations. But parents or even doctors need to know the truth about vaccinations so that their children will not have to suffer the consequences.
Thank you, Abby. I suspect that we all learned something in this presentation. Fascinating look at the vaccination industry. At the very, in your conclusion, you've indicated that you're not suggesting vaccines are never okay, and you've provided some guidelines for parents. I'm interested in your thoughts on a little more clarification of what risks should a parent be willing to take or not willing to take within this world of vaccinations?
Well, it really depends on the child. I know that some people have conditions that make it as, like, for example, take the flu vaccination. I don't believe personally that it's a very wise choice to take that vaccination, but there are some people in my class who have conditions that if they were to get the flu, it would be absolutely life-threatening. Or people who are in chemotherapy and such, if they were to contract the flu, it could be deadly. So in those cases, I would say take the risk and get the vaccination.
What about for infants or young children where those other health concerns might not be apparent or haven't been developed yet? What would your recommendation, based on your research, be to parents? Are there any infant vaccinations that are appropriate?
There's none that I really think would be appropriate. As I said, the ones given to infants, not even like an hour after they're born, I really can't agree with any of those, especially because most of them are not threatening diseases, and it's highly unlikely that they contract them, even if it's not apparent at the time.
Thank you.
My son is almost 10 months old, and as soon as he was born, we were given a card stating that the state of Texas recommended certain vaccinations and listed out some of the ones that you mentioned. You indicated why manufacturers would profit from marketing these vaccinations. You indicated why individuals who have chosen a certain lifestyle would profit by reduced prices. Why would the government encourage this? What is the profit to the government in encouraging vaccinations?
Well, a lot of the manufacturing companies are funded by the government and taxes, so it is kind of a two-way thing. There are many people who have government positions who are also on the board for Merck, Glasgow, the various big manufacturing companies. So
have you found specific instances of that in your research? I thought it was really interesting that you noted the polio example in your refutatio and gave a great example of the distinction between the United States and the UK and how that was handled and how the disease declined in both societies. Are there now societies that are similar to the United States that are not encouraging childhood vaccinations like the United States is, that we can currently make comparisons to?
You mean in going through a serious epidemic, or?
I guess just in terms of how they are making recommendations, what the frequency is of parents choosing to vaccinate so that comparisons can be made between countries?
Right. Well, I know in Australia, there was a study done. They had many mandatory vaccinations, and this sort of goes back to the contents of the vaccinations. They passed a law of removing some of the ingredients that was controversial, whether or not it was connected to adverse effects. And once they made it no longer mandatory, those rates went down considerably. They dropped.
What are some of those adverse side effects?
Brain damage, mainly cognitive dysfunction. Side effects really range from paralysis to just dizzy spells, seizures. Mainly the most common is just becoming very dizzy, and those are lifelong. They're not curable. It no longer goes away. You live with that on a daily basis. I saw so many reports and there were personal interviews with so many kids who had felt like it was the vaccine who had injured them because they were perfectly normal up until that point. And once they were vaccinated, they couldn't drive, they couldn't go out with friends, they couldn't do anything. They couldn't barely leave their bedroom because it's so uncertain. They'd go into a fit of seizures, get dizzy, get sick, back pain. These are other side effects.
What was the context for the 1988 law, which stated that vaccine manufacturers could not be held liable for those side effects?
Well, there have been an increasing number in cases against manufacturing companies, and so government, due to those cases and the results and outcome, the Supreme Court ruling seemed fit. So they made that Supreme Court ruling, and then they provided an adverse events branch and a fund for compensation. So
that's interesting. That seems kind of analogous to what's going on now with genetically modified food products and the protections being given to manufacturers.
Thank you, Abby. It was an education for me. I hadn't thought deeply about this issue. Like many parents, I think I was just sort of going along, with this thing. It's caused me to rethink some things. But I do have some clarification questions, and I'm going to try to push back a little bit on you and to see how you respond. But in your opinion, do you think the school should require vaccinations from parents? Because currently I believe we do, and at least as far as we're able. Do you think that's something we should rethink?
I do believe so. I think it depends on the vaccinations and when we're requiring them. I know state of Texas has its own requirements for school-age children as such, and I'm not sure if that, because it's the state of Texas laws, is that what requires us to have those? So.
Yeah, I'm just thinking the state of Texas does, but I mean, there's a good reason for the law as far as, just common sense. I mean, we're talking about kids who are germ factors and illnesses, and, and so when you send your kids to a place where other kids are, groups, and, it's natural that they're going to contract things. And so I'm just, in that context, would you still advise the school to rethink, or ask the government to, rethink its position on requiring schools to have vaccinations?
Yes, but I feel like that would also have to go back to vaccinations given when the child is born, because another argument about vaccinations is that because they're given such young children, 30 minutes after the child is born, it's damaging to its immune system. It weakens the immune system. It can't stand on its own. So if those laws were to be changed, I feel like children's immune systems would begin to have a healthier immune system.
By not vaccinating as it is?
Yes, and thus they would be it wouldn't really be necessary at school age to even vaccinate as much, depending on the health of the child.
Okay, that's interesting. I'm just kind of curious about the risk of vaccinating versus not vaccinating. I guess your argument is that there is greater risk in vaccinating than in not vaccinating?
Because of the lack of proper testing, I feel like there's so much uncertainty still left in the question.
Okay. What would you say to someone who said, you're just you're just a conspiracy theorist, and the pharmaceutical reps and the government are in bed together, and and it's all a big corruption scam, and what would you say to something like that?
Well, it can be taken that far if the information isn't presented in a logical way, which a lot of people don't. They jump on the, vaccinations are bad, government's killing everyone bandwagon. But I would respond to that by asking them to consider the information and the laws surrounding vaccination and whether or not those seem absolutely 100% trustworthy and right.
So at least in this instance, you think there's credible evidence that that we're not getting a fair shake, or we're not getting that there's some corruption or some conspiracy involved in the...
Not necessarily conspiracy. I wouldn't label it conspiracy. I would label it a breakdown of the correct way of handling it.
Okay. Maybe a lack of wisdom on the part of our leaders.
Yes. Well, because eventually it breaks down into money. It kind of breaks down into
Follow
profits.
the money. Right.
Profits. And
Smart.
I think that it started out not heading for profit and heading for protection. But it's broken down to that.
That's interesting. Do you know what other countries, I know how other countries approach this issue of mandated vaccinations or anything like that? Is there any country out there that you think is a good model that America can look to?
Well, Britain has not mandated vaccinations, and many people in Britain rejected vaccinations, like around 60% during the polio epidemic. So I think Britain is a good example. Australia is reforming its standards for vaccination.
If you take the formaldehyde and mercury out of the vaccinations, would you have a problem with vaccinations?
I'd have less of a problem with vaccinations.
Is it possible to manufacture these things without those
It is.
harmful chemicals?
Yes, it is possible, but the vaccine companies do not do that because, well, it is not possible without aluminum. You would have to find some other adjuvant to carry the disease. Otherwise, the immunity could be like as short as a week. But the formaldehyde, I believe, could be taken out. It would just make it much harder to produce and much more expensive.
So it gets back to the problem.
Yeah.
Issue. So, are you calling for an end to vaccinations, or higher testing standards, or reform?
Reforming the businesses, reforming the way they're manufactured, and the way they're marketed. The way they're marketed pushes them so hard. Just sales. Like, I had an example in my slideshow, but I didn't show it because I wasn't sure if y'all were going to ask about the marketing issue.
So top like 3 or 4 reforms, if you were standing before Congress and you were trying to present this information to them, and you wanted to say, okay, listen, what we need are these 3 or 4 things to fix this, what would that be?
Reevaluation of the way they're marketed. This is the example of the marketing. That is for the HPV marketed. It's aimed at girls ages 11 and up. And I think it's pretty self-explanatory. It's shocking because just what we're pushing at our children. And so it's the child who's now going to the parent going, oh no, I have to, I'm going to die. I have to get vaccinated. But another reform that I would suggest is the testing. It really needs to be extended, and no one has ever taken, there's been no study done where they have taken the individual ingredients in a vaccine and tested its effects on humans, ever. So, testing, making it mandatory.
Right, you went to that point about giving parents more options
Yeah.
with their care providers.
And just making the information concerning vaccinations more available.
For those who are present, I think I'd like to make a clarification of the school's policy regarding vaccines. The school requires and expects parents to comply with the state of Texas law on the subject. And the state of Texas law is that they have to either complete certain vaccinations or complete and submit to the Texas Department of Health a conscientious objector form. And so our school's position is that they either get the vaccinations or they complete the conscientious objector form in compliance with Texas law. I just thought that might be a helpful point of clarification. It seems to me that you're advocating that some vaccines are better than others. Do you agree with that?
Well, I believe tetanus vaccine is a helpful vaccine. I don't believe it's necessarily as harmful as the others, and I believe that it's lose a limb or get a tetanus shot and take that risk. There haven't been particular studies or any evidence showing that that specific vaccine is very detrimental. The formaldehyde contents in that vaccine is almost completely removed by the time it is injected. So, I believe, I almost lost my foot once. I stepped on a nail. That's the only vaccine I've had, but I have my foot.
It's interesting to note that the tetanus vaccine is also, it can be administered at any time, including after risk of exposure.
Yes.
With other vaccines, do you know of whether or not there's a window to offer the vaccine after exposure?
Not that I'm aware of.
So should one of the considerations for parents be with any given vaccine whether or not death is on the line as opposed to mere illness such as chickenpox?
Yeah. Yes, I agree with that it should be anywhere. I did think of another vaccine which you can get afterwards. It's the meningitis shot that it's required for almost every single college. And meningitis gets deadly very quickly. So, and the shot is available afterwards. So you can get the meningitis shot after you contract meningitis. It just has to be very soon. That is why that one is pushed more to being taken as a regular.
And meningitis also spreads very quickly with students who are living in close proximity to each other, such as in a Yarbrough.
Yes.
Of Vioxx is a drug that was pulled off of the market because of the deaths that were a direct result. Are there any examples of vaccinations that have been pulled off of the market?
Well, MMR has not been pulled off the market, as I mentioned, but MMR vaccinations, there's very strong controversy over it. The lawsuit is still continuing, so that one is being considered.
So let's say you're just a regular person like me, and you don't know anything about chemistry, you don't know anything about science. Where would I look to find, well, does the Bible tell me that formaldehyde is bad for me? Where do I find that information?
Well, there's several institutes set up to inform people about vaccinations, by people who believe that there is not enough information out there. A really, really, really good foundation is the National Vaccine Information Institute, and they present the unbiased information, and they present links to all the rest of the informational places that have vaccine information.
And for chemicals like mercury, is that only dangerous if it's injected, Or is there any evidence? I mean, you mentioned mercury. How do I know where, like if there's mercury in the chemistry lab, how would I find out that I'm not supposed to touch it or mess with it? I mean, is it only bad when it's injected? It sounds unrelated, but if this stuff's so dangerous.
How would you know not to touch the mercury?
Well, yeah, I mean, is there any publicly available information about the dangers of chemicals like mercury?
Usually mercury is accompanied by danger warnings. It's kind of...
So what you're saying then is that this is stuff that the MSDS sheet in the chem lab.
Yes.
So you're arguing that if it's on the MSDS sheet is dangerous, I should probably not inject it into someone else's body.
Probably not.
Okay.
Abby, that was a good job going through a bunch of technical information, coming out with some good information for us. I have a question. When NutraSweet came out, they put it in cereal and thought it was going to be good for diabetic children. And the children started having permanent neurological problems. That product was almost immediately pulled off the shelves. Why do you think that they're not doing something with these vaccines when there is evidence that it causes neurological problems?
Well, there are people trying to have something done about it, but the manufacturers and such, no one really realizes, because it's not that difficult to find the information that says there are these chemicals in here, but the thing is that people assume vaccinations are making me better. I don't need to go look and see that there's dangerous things in them.
You kind of made me feel guilty about giving my son vaccines. Don't tell him what I've done to him, right? Those of you that know him can laugh. But my question is this. If you were going to think about one or two of the vaccines that are available that you would highly recommend, would there be any, and if so, what would they be?
That I would highly recommend? Depending, tetanus, as I mentioned, meningitis, I guess, if necessary. Really depends on the circumstances. Just
Thank you.
Oh, go ahead.
Finish.
Oh, well, just for the child as an individual. Really just up to that, the circumstances.
Thank you, Abby.
This is a challenging issue, and it's an issue that is very relevant to adolescents today. And so it is with great and intentional deliberateness that we have included grades 7 through 12 as audience participants, audience members. And I challenge you to think carefully and cautiously about the material that we are about to hear.
Good afternoon. My name is Emily Borcher, and today I have the pleasure of introducing our final speaker, Cathryn Yarbrough. Kat came to Annapolis in the 7th grade. Ever since I first met her during middle school volleyball practice, I've always thought of her as an encourager and team leader, qualities that will enable her to succeed when she attends Austin College in Sherman, Texas this fall. Kat plans on studying pre-law and business in hopes of one day becoming a corporate ambassador. In addition to her course load, she will be a defensive specialist on the volleyball team. Today, she will be addressing visual media's effect on female body image. Please join me in welcoming Cathryn Yarbrough.
Take a moment with me and think of your favorite superhero. Now take a moment and think of your favorite supervillain. For some, it may be Loki of the 2012 film Avengers, or perhaps Bane of The Dark Knight Rises. But mine is Dr. Octavius of the 2004 film Spider-Man 2. In many instances, the worse the crimes, the more universally popular the villain will become. However, I love Dr. Octavius so much because he shows tragedy and character depth, rather than just performing crimes. Dr. Otto Gunther Octavius was a brilliant and respected nuclear physicist who designed a set of highly advanced mechanical arms controlled via a brain-computer interface. During accidental radiation leak, the apparatus became fused to Octavius's body. It was then later revealed that the radiation had mutated his brain, so that the arms began controlling his mind and his physical actions. The additional limbs took advantage of his pain and his anger, and with the manipulation of his mind, turned the scientist to a life of crime. By developing this intimate relationship with the arms, the doctor proved a changed individual. In Desire of the Kingdom by James K.A. Smith, he uses this fictional character as a means for establishing a greater point. He compares Dr. Octavius and his arms to the world and our availability to media. Dr. Smith questions if it is possible that we have become so connected with media that we no longer control the media, but rather the media controls us. The solution to Dr. Smith's question may be found if we further investigate visual media and its effect on body image within women. The main forms of visual media are magazines, movies, internet articles, and television. Media is an all-goal-oriented technical means or instrument for the obtainment of information in print, visual, or auditory forms. Going back to its origin, it derives from the late Latin medius, meaning the middle of. Therefore, by definition, media is the message and the messenger. It creates and delivers content that shapes our lives, society, minds, and emotions. Media has become ingrained into our everyday lives. Very seldomly do we stop to think about what we see or intake. Edmund Carpenter, a visual arts anthropologist, stated, "English is a mass medium. All languages are mass media. The new mass media, film, radio, and TV, are new languages. Their grammar is yet unknown. Each codifies reality differently. Each conceals unique metaphysics. Linguists tell us that it's possible to say anything in any language, if you just use enough words or images." A recent study done by the Kaiser Family Foundation found that American teenagers spend 31 hours a week watching TV, 17 hours a week listening to music, 3 hours a week watching movies, 4 hours a week reading magazines, and 10 hours a week online. That's 10 hours and 45 minutes of media consumption every day. Now, for a young child who intakes this much media, could it be possible that they are being shown negative images and not even know it? One of the greatest effects visual media will have on its onlookers is a poor body image. Body image is the picture of our body which we form in our mind, an individual's perceptions, thoughts, or feelings about his or her own body. Our body image is learned. Our parents and cultures make the greatest contribution to our body image, acting as mirrors reflecting back at us. Our experiences with others, such as teachers, friends, and family, add to the image that we see in this mirror. Body images are developed between the ages of 8 and 15, generally when our level of media intake is at its highest. This massive intake of media then gradually begins desensitizing us and forming us into its mold. It then makes the greatest contribution to who we become, and we begin to see ourselves in light of its overlurking shadow. Marie Wilson, founder and president emeritus of the White House Project, says, "You can't be what you can't see." What then are we expected to do when all we see is size 0 models and actresses who are sexualized and objectified? When we're told that being skinny and sexy is the ideal view of beauty, that's what we want to become. Poor body image due to visual media is a serious problem, and adolescent youth are unaware of the negative representations in visual media and have accumulated a poor body image as a result. It is a generally accepted truth that your ability to discern between what is right and wrong increases as time goes on. Young girls have not yet had the choice between substance and sustenance, and don't really care about what they see as long as it's pink or glitters. Unfortunately, young girls of ages 4 to 10 with this exact mentality are targeted by media to purchase toys that promote a poor body image. Barbie, a more popular choice among girls aged 4 to 10, has had a 23% increase in sales, which is equivalent to $15 million. The slogan for the Barbie franchise is "Be who you want to be." But is this the message that they're really sending? For instance, if Barbie were a real person, she would be 6 foot tall, it's a foot taller than me, weigh 110 pounds, and wear a size 4. Her measurements would be 39 inches across the bust, 18 inches across the waist, and 33 inches across her hips. Barbie's waist-hip ratio is at a 0.5. A healthy adult woman's waist-hip ratio should be at a 0.6 or higher. In 1965, a sleepover Barbie was released, complete with a pillow, scale, and a book titled "How to Lose Weight." If you then flip over the book, it says simply, "Don't eat." Researchers from Sussex and the University of the West of England looked at the effects of images of the dolls on 200 primary school-age girls aged 5 to 8. After looking at the images, the girls were asked to pick figures that represented their actual body shape, the body shape they ideally desired, and their ideal body shape as a grown adult woman. The researchers then analyzed the difference between the shape the girls thought that they had and the shape that they desired. The 5- and 6-year-old girls were more dissatisfied with their own shape and wanted more extreme thinness after viewing the Barbie images than any other images. The 6- and 7-year-olds had an even stronger response. After young girls had played with Barbie, they reached their preteens, which is generally of age between 10 and 14. It is at this time we see visual media actively working in the lives of the younger populace, and we see a very distinct and notable change in their attitude. In 1937, Walt Disney Studios created the first full-length animated film in motion picture history with Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. Disney has then since grown to become an international superpower, being the second largest media conglomerate in the world, being available on basic cable and satellite in more than 99 million US homes, and to more than 300 million households around the world. Disney Channel, the more recent of Disney's pursuits, claims to be kid-driven, family-inclusive entertainment. However, most parents will believe that Disney is just pure fun and innocent. However, as Miguel Parker of Mickey Mouse Monopoly says, Disney has made a spectacle of its innocence. It hides behind its innocence. Rarely are the themes of Disney's work questioned, but if we take a closer look, we find that they're actually quite controversial. Young girls have looked at Disney for the answers of the most pressing questions of their childhood. What should I look like? How do I behave and fulfill my role as a woman? Disney Channel responds back, and perhaps not with the answer that we would like for them to. In Season 1, Episode 7 of the hit show Shake It Up, a supermodel remarks, "I could just eat you up. Well, if I ate." In a short skit on the show So Random, an Australian character that happens to be a male model raves on about how he only eats one full meal a week because too much meat on the leaps is forever on the sheens, which we may only come to interpret as, if you have larger legs, you have to work out a lot in order to change them. Disney Channel makes farce about the need to be skinny on a kid-driven television station. Perhaps the main issue, aside from the fact that the jokes were even made, is that over half of the youth watching the shows didn't see anything wrong with the jokes. Actress Demi Lovato, who left Disney because of her own eating disorder, tweeted about the inappropriate nature of the jokes. The response of her calling out Disney was horrifying. A majority of girls tweeted instead to get over it, or to grow a sense of humor, learn to laugh. Laughing is the exact problem. What Disney jokes about is someone's reality. Lovato herself opened up about her struggles facing her own body image issues. She would go on stage and sing on an empty stomach, and some weeks only eat 2 full meals. The unhealthy image promoted by Disney Channel and by Barbie are now more transparent in modern day culture as a grown adult woman. Television, video games, magazines, and largely the film industries are all responsible for the degrading self-image found in the women of today. A report released in 2009 states that at the current rate of progress on stereotyping women, it will take another 75 years to achieve gender equality in the media. Women in modern day media are stereotyped as the glamorous sex kitten, the sainted mother, the devious witch, the hard-faced corporate of the political climate. These types of stereotypes overemphasize the importance of fitting in among developing youth. With time and repeated viewing, girls may become dissatisfied with the young woman they have become, or the individual that they may have become. Rarely are women the main protagonists in films, and when they are stripped of their power by their sexualization. The top 2 grossing movies of 2012 were The Avengers and The Dark Knight Rises, both of which prove this exact point. The costumes make the superhero, but why should all other male counterparts get technologically enhanced armor while our heroines get tight, derriere-revealing spandex and cat ears? In the promotion posters for these films, the pose needs to be noted. All of the males are facing forward into the screen, and the woman is standing with her posterior to the screen and generally smirking over her shoulder in a seductive manner. Unfortunately, this is a reoccurring objectifying pose. Transformers with Megan Fox on her motorcycle, Lara Croft Tomb Raider, any of the characters from the 2011 film Sucker Punch, and this list goes on and on. We begin to see women as objects of desire instead of human beings. The media objectifies them and promotes sexuality and physical appearance over a woman's intelligence and her abilities to achieve greatness. Studies have shown that nearly 3/4 of women reported feeling bad about their bodies after only 3 minutes of looking at models in magazines. 48% will wish that they are as skinny as these models, and 31% will admit to having starved themselves. This is absolutely ludicrous because the average female model is not only much taller than the average woman, but also weighs up to 25% less. Poor body image can lead to depression, anxiety, and eating disorders. A Canadian study found 5- and 6-year-olds who reported having dieted for the purpose of achieving an ideal body. 53% of 13-year-old girls are unhappy with their bodies, and that number will increase to 78% by the age of 17. Between 5 to 10 million Americans have eating disorders, nearly all girls and women. Anyone may become victim to this kind of hateful thought process. Body dysmorphic disorder, BDD as I will reference it, is a condition that involves obsessions, which are distressing thoughts that repeatedly intrude into a person's awareness. With BDD, the distressing thoughts are about perceived appearance flaws. Anorexia nervosa is unfortunately one of the greater known disorders of our time. Anorexia is a serious and potentially life-threatening mental illness, which includes an intense fear of gaining weight. Weight management is then fulfilled by ceasing to eat. Conversely, with anorexia, where you quit eating, is bulimia nervosa, often called bulimia, in which it's a type of eating disorder that an individual eats a lot of food in a short amount of time and then tries to prevent weight gain by purging their body of this food. Purging may be done by making yourself throw up or by taking laxatives in pill or liquid form. 5 to 10% of anorexics die within 10 years after developing this disease. 18 to 20% of anorexics will be dead after 20 years, and only 30 to 40% of anorexics will ever fully recover. The mortality rate associated with anorexia nervosa is 12 times higher than all the other leading causes of death for females aged 15 to 24 years of age. We are bombarded with images every day of size 0 models and actresses, and we're told that being skinny is the ideal view of beauty. Poor body image due to visual media is a serious problem, but the solution lies at the core of what you choose to believe about what you were sent here to do. Peter 3:3-4 says, "Do not let your adorning be external, the braiding of your hair and the putting on of gold jewelry, the clothing that you wear. But let your adorning be the hidden person of the heart with the imperishable beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which in God's sight is very precious." God did not create you to live in mental torment and dissatisfaction with your body. He created you as an expression of love to explore and enjoy the world that He created. There's so much more to life than how you look or how skinny you can be. You, yourself, may be a young woman here today who has fallen into the trap of believing that the only thing that matters is your physical appearance. Do you not know that your bodies are temples of the Holy Spirit, who is in you, whom you have received from God? You are not your own. You are bought at a price. Therefore, honor God with your bodies. 1 Corinthians 6:19-21. Your body image should not be defined by our society or by what the media tells you to look like, but through the Lord. Jesus' body was bruised, battered, and murdered so that God could redeem yours. For the older listeners in my audience today, it is crucial that we educate ourselves to those who look up to us as mentors. I must stress this word, education. We can take this destructive influence and repent. But first, we ourselves must learn what is destructive and what is not. Parents must monitor and reflect with their children on the weight they can bear because of the media. We have the ability to be the hero. We have this great power of visual media, and now we have the responsibility to use it wisely, to build up our future generations, not tear them down. We can use our experiences to guide those who know not what they do and see. We can't let the statistics rise. Using the talents and abilities God has given us, we can empower and encourage. It begins in us. It starts here. We must first be the change we wish to see in this world. So I ask you now, who are you and what will you do? Thank you.
Sitting here in awe, I think. Well done.
Thank you.
Thank you, Cathryn. You specifically limited your topic to the impact of visual media on young women. Why did you choose to make that restriction?
Because there was just so much. I could have done visual media's impact on politicians, on young men, on elders in churches. There was, I found so much. And I felt like I had to make it something more relevant to myself and to some of the people in my audience.
In your research, did you find that there are any other Christians or groups of Christians that are trying to address this issue with regard to involvement in the media?
I didn't come across any specific groups. I do know that there are certain groups that are not specifically Christian labeled. There's anorexia prevention, there's bulimia prevention. There are several hotlines that you can call if you yourself are having issues with your body. There are several books that have come out specifically related to Christians and how we are supposed to see ourselves in light of the gospel. But I did not come across any specifically labeled Christian groups.
Perhaps there are young people in your audience today who are interested in going into visual media, perhaps as filmmakers or photographers. What encouragement would you make to them as far as how they could make decisions that would help to promote a biblical body image rather than a damaging body image?
I would have to say probably the first step to really promoting positive body image, if you do choose to go into visual media, is first of all, don't promote script or don't promote language or body language in any form or manner that would promote the over-sexualization of a woman. Obviously, I talked about the clothing and how everything is really tight and, sometimes they're supposed to be powerful, but then it just kind of goes away because we see them more as, instead of seeing them as powerful individuals, we see them as just kind of a nice looking woman. And so the first step I would say is make sure that everything that you're doing is glorifying of God and making sure that you are promoting a woman who is promoting whatever is true, good, and beautiful in everything, in all their actions on screen and off.
To play devil's advocate for a moment, I think we're all well aware of the health issues in our own city, in Corpus Christi. And the fact that obesity is one of those big issues. Taking that into consideration, what's wrong with encouraging fitness?
My thesis was not specifically against fitness. My thesis was specifically against being just skinny. There is a major distinction between just having the drive to be skinny and having the drive to be in shape. I did actually look into the distinctions between health and obesity. I read a book by Sarah Goggin who discusses the distinctions between being healthy and being skinny. Oftentimes those can go hand in hand, but there's absolutely nothing healthy about, obviously, unhealthy manners of losing weight and of trying to get the skinny, ideal, perfect body. And so here, especially in Corpus Christi, I do feel that it is crucial that we promote being healthy, but again, being healthy is different than necessarily being skinny.
What was your interest in this topic in selecting it?
I personally have struggled for a very long time with my own body. Being on a volleyball team, as long as I have, all the girls are really tall. And they're really tall, and they're generally the stereotype, they're really beautiful. And so I myself, being this 5-foot girl back here, like, hey guys, I'm still here, it's been an issue for me. I've always tried to fit into the morph of, being a part of these other girls that I've seen. And coming to Annapolis my 7th grade year really made me realize, like, I'm Kat, and I don't have to look like anybody else. And over the summer I watched a documentary titled Misrepresentation, and that really just hit home for me, and that's what really sparked me to do this specific topic.
Why do you think, there's kind of a big question, but why do you think visual media has such a powerful influence over our perceptions of ourselves?
That's a great question. I feel like visual media has such a great influence on us because we let it. Because we see these images and it's in our natural sinful human nature to look at people and be envious, to be gluttonous, to be prideful in what we want. If we see someone that we feel is prettier than us, we're like, I want her shoes, I want her body, I want to be that. And I feel like visual media has such a great bearing on our lives because we let it.
We heard earlier in the week, yesterday, I think, Ernest deliver his thesis on the power of auditory, things in shaping our morality and in shaping our worldview and that sort of thing. Would you consider visual media more powerful in shaping our worldview and image and morality, and or how would you compare it to, say, the auditory
Of course.
media?
Obviously, Ernest gave a very morally shaking thesis, and I actually looked into that, and the first choice was actually cell phones and media. And I have to say that in terms of which perhaps has a greater bearing, I would have to say visual media, because something has to promote that music. And so, we look at all these, just to go with the examples Ernest gave, Luis Tapia and Kanye West and all those other artists, someone has to promote those artists. And that is done through the use of advertising, through the use of online, Facebook, through Twitter, through Instagram. Like this, and you'll get a free demo. Media is everywhere, and it's virtually impossible to circumvent. Therefore, I would have to say, perhaps visual media is the greater bearing.
How strong do you think are the connections between the disorders that you cited and the visual media? You can link them, and I think there's a common sense reason to do that. But how strong is that connection? Such that we live in a media saturated, world where there's television and bombardment of images 24/7. If you're awake, you're being bombarded with this visual communication and these messages that are being sent. So I guess my question is, how strong do you think that connection is between, our children growing up in this and these disorders that are life-threatening?
Right. I think the connection is stronger than we like to think. I think, aside from the obvious, connection that we make, 70% of anorexics actually live here in America. And the rest are, internationally. But also, America is one of the leading advertising visual, managements. And so I think despite the obvious connections that we could make between visual media and poor body image, I feel like it's a lot stronger than we think.
Well, how do we escape it? I guarantee we've all seen those superhero movies that you say are objectifying women and doing these kinds of things, and how do we escape, our own susceptibility to this?
There's no escape. I'm going to be completely blunt. There is no escape. The only route is to change it. The only way to do anything about it is to change it. And again, that's really what tied me into this misrepresentation, is that aside from just informing others of the going-ons around them, they tried to change it. There was recently a campaign that came out for shoes that had a woman, and she was running, doing the whole Babe Watch thing, and they were saying women are jealous of her, men want her, all this stuff. And misrepresentation began a quote-unquote boycott. And it was called #I'm not buying it. and it said, we're not going to buy this because this isn't us. This isn't us. And so really the only way to change it, and I'm not saying go boycott stuff because that is a terrible route to take, but I do have to say there's no escape. There's only change.
Do you think, so you've created a connection, or you described the connection between poor body image and eating disorders. Are there other ramifications for poor body image? What do you think some of those other ramifications might
Yes. Generally, the correlation, something, again, I could not even touch in my thesis. Generally, another conclusion of having a poor body image is as well having a poor self-image. And your self-image is directly correlated with your personality, your actions, your outward facade, you could say, for the actors in my midst. And your self-image is how others generally perceive you. This is seen in several television shows in which we see young girls doing actions like several of the ones Ernest spoke about, the underage drinking, the premarital sex, the smoking of weed, the drugs, everything. Again, that can be a repercussion of having a poor body image. Because if you don't feel good about the way that you look, you try to compensate and make up for that and do other things to compensate for that. And so, your poor self-image.
Do you think that the poor, now I recognize that your thesis is dealing primarily with poor body image, but in the course of your research, did you identify other results that appear to be a direct effect of this media saturation and the nature of the media that we're saturated with?
I did not explicitly seek out any other consequences of media. I specifically focused on body image, which, again, I'm kind of wishing I had sought out other consequences. But no, I did not seek out anything other than that.
I'm just curious, do you think Disney is evil?
No. Oh no, I love Disney princesses. Oh no.
I think it's evil. But I mean, there is a sense of if there is this agenda, in a sense. I mean, you look at the princesses, which are marketed heavily towards these young girls, and certainly, nobody has a body like Jasmine or Little Mermaid or any of these icons of female, So in this, is this not insidious that we would put these images in front of our children as, and that Disney would promote this to children as their heroes and heroines?
Funny story, that was actually originally one of my contingencies was Disney princesses, but then I changed it to Disney Channel because I felt it was more relevant in terms of age. And so Disney princesses, again, it all ties back to education. I was blessed with, at a young age, being shown Little Mermaid. Ariel's my favorite. And I was blessed at a young age of having my mom say, that's not real, there's a talking fish. This is obviously not real. And I was blessed with being surrounded by mentors and by being surrounded by teachers who taught me that it's not about body. When you come to school and you start fixing your hair, you're doing your makeup, it's not about that. It's about learning. And again, I think that Disney, and I feel like Disney princesses, there are certain virtues in which would be wonderful to promote. Ariel's courageousness, Belle's love for literature. There are wonderful qualities to the Disney princesses, but it's just unfortunate that we don't see those, and instead we're like, wow, okay, Jasmine, put on some clothes. That's and again, if we go back to the biblical stories, Disney has biblical principles. In Ruth, with the redeeming of the princess, the slaying of the dragon. If we go down to the fundamentals, they are the same, similar stories, just told differently with a bit more chauvinist approach.
On the chauvinist approach, this one's a little bit loftier of a question. I'm just going to see what you think of this, if you've thought about this at all. We've been told, women have been told, at least for the past, 50 years, maybe 40 years, solid, that their body is a source of empowerment for them, that their sexuality is a source of empowerment for them, and so women have been told to use their sexuality to their advantage in society by portraying themselves in these ways. I mean, that has been the focus of the feminist movement for, like I said, all of the, So I'm just curious if you find that to be self-destructive or ironic that they're in fact. I mean, could you speak to that issue a little bit?
I was actually wondering when the feminist word would get dropped. In terms of feminism, I have to look at it as there are really two different ends. There's the feminists who believe in equality, who believe in equal payment, who believe in equal opportunity. And then there's the feminists who are like, women are superior, we're awesome, all men need to serve us. And it's comedic, but it's really actually very relevant. And so I believe that the women who say, use your sexuality, that's empowering, yeah, those are on this spectrum. Those are the women who are saying, use what the good Lord gave you, something that I've heard in several movies. And I have to say I can't understand it, because again, we're instructed to use our bodies to glorify. I keep hearing Romans in which do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your minds. Therefore, I think that it would be accurate to say that women should not use their sexual power, make it sound like it's X-ray vision. I mean, women should not use their sexual power, nor should we use our bodies to try to achieve a certain goal. If this is to be achieved, it should be through intellectual prowess, it should be through intelligence, and through being capable of logically discerning, how do I need to get this? What steps do I need to take in order to get here? In order to go to college, I need to go to high school. I need to perhaps get a job every now and then. It's that, not I need to go seduce my professor. Yeah, it's in a movie. There's several movies that are about that. And I think that quite frankly, it's quite horrifying.
Final question, just to push back against your comments on Disney. What's the difference between the Avengers movie poster showing and highlighting a superwoman's derriere and a Disney princess highlighting her midriff?
I think that the main distinction is the animation. I'm not saying in any way, shape, or form that what we put the Disney princesses in is acceptable. But again, I feel like Disney thought that because of this animation, they're suddenly making it okay. Oh, there's nothing really there. She's a mermaid. That doesn't make it okay. You can still see a very large quantity of her. Whereas when we look at the Avengers movie poster or any of the other superhero movies, it's actually there. I mean, there as in CGI and other things that they use, but it's still there. Scarlett Johansson is very much there. I think that the main distinction is between the realism that Disney feels it's suddenly made okay, and which in my mind, I see it all as she's half naked.
All right, well, thank you, Kat. Let's give her a round of applause.
amazing mentor and teacher who is now walking away. Come on back up to the stage. We just really want to let you guys understand what an amazing teacher and mentor he is. Mr. Smith, if you can just come on up to the stage really quick. We cannot wait until we get to come back and see you guys doing senior thesis. All of the introductions that Mr. Smith did were completely just out of the blue that he used as his method of logic, of his use of rhetoric, of his use, I'm still kind of shaking, as an amazing public speaker and teacher. And we cannot wait until you guys have him as a teacher and you guys are up here using what you have been given by Annapolis Christian Academy. So we got you a little something to thank you for all of the time and effort and patience that you have had to use with our class for especially the past week. We were all nervous wrecks, like, what are we gonna do? So we really want to thank you, Mr. Smith, and we pray that you guys have a good rest of the year, and thank you very much.
You're welcome.